Alright, today let's make some white chocolate. Now some chocolate purists will insist that white chocolate really isn't chocolate. Now I won't argue that point, but I will definitely say that white chocolate is kind of its own beast. Made with milk powder, sugar, and cocoa butter, the soft and creamy taste is kind of more akin to a candy or special dessert than I would consider like a normal chocolate bar. However, that isn't to say this stuff is not super delicious. And also, as it turns out, it's super easy to make. So let's go ahead and get started. Now for this recipe, we really only need 3 things. And I'm actually going to use the same amount of each of these items. So I'm going to use 1/3 cocoa butter, 1/3 sugar, and 1/3 milk powder. The cocoa butter I was able to find at kind of a specialty like Whole Foods style store. It is probably the most expensive stuff. Now the milk powder, I actually found this in my local bodega that's just down the street from me, and it comes in these packets. I've seen this actually quite frequently everywhere. And for the sugar that we're going to use, we really want to use granulated sugar, and I'll get to later why we want to do that. Now for me, I decided to use about 100 grams of each one of these things, which turns out to create 2 bars quite perfectly. Now, to be fair, in retrospect, I would actually cut down the amount of sugar. I don't have a huge sweet tooth, and so the bars I ended up with were a little bit too sweet for me. Okay, so now let's actually start making the chocolate. All right, so the first thing we're gonna need to do is turn this granulated sugar into powdered sugar. Now to do this, I'm gonna pour my 100 grams of granulated sugar into my blender and just begin blending. Now you may be asking, why don't I just use powdered sugar here? Well, the problem is that typically they add cornstarch to powdered sugar to keep it fluffy. However, I really don't want cornstarch in my chocolate, and it can kind of mess with the flavor and texture. So I decided to just make my own. All right, so after about a minute of blending, we should have a nice pile of powdered sugar. And we'll just set that off to the side for right now. And the next step is to start melting our cocoa butter. Now I'm gonna use a double boiler for this, and although I'm not 100% sure that this is necessary, in my last chocolate video, I just actually ended up microwaving the cocoa butter, which turned out to be pretty effective. Just melting it low for about 20 to 30 seconds. In any case, after about a minute of heating up, the cocoa butter rapidly melts. The only thing that we really need to keep an eye out for is making sure that the cocoa butter doesn't get heated up too much past 88 degrees Fahrenheit or 31 degrees Celsius. And once it's completely melted, you just want to pour this into the blender into the powdered sugar. You also want to add in a piece of tempered chocolate to the blender so that we can make sure that when it blends, it will mix up, and this will be known as seeding to create a nice temper later. And then just turn the blender on low and just let it mix up together. Once the sugar and cocoa butter have effectively mixed, we can add in our last ingredient, which is our powdered milk. You can just dump this in and just use the blender to kind of really make sure that it gets mixed up. You might have to scrape the sides down a few times, but it should come together. The longer you go, the more smooth your final product will be. Now the blender did an okay job of mixing this up, and the fault really lay with the milk powder. Now if I were a smarter man, I may have also decided to add the powdered milk in with the granulated sugar and just allow the dry ingredients to blend together. So I actually recommend that that's what you do if you're making this from scratch. But since I didn't do that, I had to kind of dance with the person I brought. So go ahead and just pour them into some molds and allow them to cool down. Once they do harden up, we're done. So here we are with some white chocolate with a teensy bit of graininess from the powdered milk, but it was nowhere near as grainy as the last chocolate video I made. Now, again, normally these things would have been wet milled into a very fine paste before molding, but for a homemade product, it actually came out really good, and I actually just recommend this. So if for whatever reason you have some spare cocoa butter laying around, you might want to give this a try because it tastes good and it was pretty fun. And you can also start to experiment with adding other stuff into it, like maybe some berries or some flavoring. The world is your oyster when it comes to this stuff. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this quick video. If you did, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you guys again next week. All right, bye.